More FSDO snitches? What's going on with 20 fatal crashes in 20 days? That and more on this episode of Taking Off. Hi, I'm Dan Milliken, and we're going to be talking about what's buzzing in the aviation community. I'm going to rant a little bit, so go ahead, throw down some comments right down there. I can handle it. In today's video, September is turning into a fatal crash-a-day average, and snitches get stitches. But before that, a YouTube video getting tons of comments. A student pilot touches down, hits full power to go around, and veers right over the grass before impacting a hangar. We've all seen the video. We've made all sorts of comments. But what really happened? First of all, this isn't even an FAA or NTSB deal. The incident happened in Toronto. This is a Canadian investigation. The comments are pretty much low-hanging fruit. Why didn't he cut the throttle? Why didn't he apply left rudder? Valid questions, and people immediately jump to condemn the student. And maybe the condemnation is valid. Or maybe we discover when the investigation is completed that the throttle cable snapped or the right tire blew out. Sure, for every critical system failure, there was an action the student could have taken. But he's a student. What we can do, instead of condemning him, is take what we can from the crash. Teach our students to keep their hand on the throttle during critical phases of flight and to cut the power in a situation like that. To work the problem and not give up. Drill in them to turn the plane with the rudder pedals and not the aileron. To make sure our students are ready to handle what might confront them before we sign off on solos. This isn't Microsoft Flight Simulator or Jumanji. You don't get 3 lives all the time. And that's my thoughts on that video. Okay. Speaking of crashes, and before we talk about the aviation rats, and not the good kind, there's been a rash of fatal general aviation accidents. First 20 days of September has seen 20 crashes, significant loss of life, and most of those occurred on VFR days. And most of those appear to be loss of thrust on takeoff. The grassroots movement to train for real life-saving techniques is clearly not moving fast enough. Voluntary Advanced Qualifications Program, or AQP-V, is starting to get a foothold, but we need more instructors pushing it. Josh Flowers of Aviation 101 has a great checklist. So does Steve at Flight Chops. Download it. Use it with your students. Links are below in the description. Learn to push that nose down to get to that minimum maneuvering speed and not stall the airplane. These people are dying because when the engine fails, they're pulling that yoke back or not pushing it forward enough to maintain the critical speed. You stall the airplane at 50 feet, you're probably going to die. Even if all you have is trees or power lines, you've got a better chance of survival if you fly the airplane to the surface rather than letting the airplane tumble out of the sky. Use the training tools and train for the maneuvers that can save your life and the lives of your passengers. Engine out in my 210, pitch for 85 knots. 85. That number is ingrained in my brain. I won't have to look it up in an emergency checklist. In a loss of thrust situation, you pitch for best glide. And most of the time, that means pitching forward. AQP-V is not mandated by the FAA, but even better, is being mandated by safe pilots who want to see your number of successful landings match your number of takeoffs. So enough about that. Okay. Here in North Texas, there's another rash of snitchery, tattle-telling, rat-finks, calling the FSDO because of something you saw on Facebook or YouTube. This summer in a previous rant, I dealt with the situation where a well-beloved YouTuber was reported to the FSDO by a butthurt student pilot. So now I'm going to dive in a little deeper on this whole thing of ratting out other human beings. I had a client one time who at the age of 16, barefoot and just with the clothes on her back and with her family, escaped Cuba in the early 60s. She talked about how the move from the corrupt Batista regime to the communist Castro regime was actually very slow. The frog in the water slowly turning it up to boil. One of the key indicators of the change, she told me, was when neighbors were encouraged to rat out any behavior not sanctioned by the new ruling party. Well, people being people, they started reporting their fellow neighbors, accusing them of wrongful anti-Castro things when really it was just settling an old grudge. Kid next door idling his 57 Chevy late at night, waking you up. Call him in. He's anti-Castro. Neighbor left their Christmas decorations up too long. Call him in. Neighbor mowed the lawn at 7 a.m. on a Saturday. Ring, ring, called in. Well, maybe not all those exact things in 1961 Cuba, but you get the idea. And that's what we're seeing with a lot of these calls to the FSDO. Say an A&P mechanic shop is doing lousy or even mediocre work, and the owner takes his plane back and tells others about his bad experience. All of a sudden, an anonymous tip to the FSDO that the owner was doing this or that. And some of these accusations don't even pretend to ride on a modicum of truth, sometimes blatantly false. Or, in my case, at an uncontrolled field, the self-proclaimed old man king of the airport didn't like how we responded to him when we were legally flying a drone. Boom! Call to the FSDO. It's got to stop. If you're one of those people using the FSDO as a way to hurt someone who you feel has hurt you, stop. Try understanding the other party. Try forgiveness. Get true healing. Don't be that bitter, hateful person who dials the FSDO as another weapon in your arsenal against your fellow human beings. For your own good and mental health, don't do it. Let it go. So what does that mean? That you should never call the FSDO? No. There are times. But if you're using the call to just hurt someone, that's a clear warning flag. You're crossing a line you don't need to be crossing. The time to call the FSDO is when life or property is at significant risk. If at all possible and time allows, first go to the person and talk with them. Give them the chance to change. Or maybe you discover you were just wrong and you need the chance to change. But only if it can't be resolved and significant risks of life and property are imminent, then call the FSDO. But try everything else you possibly can to resolve it first. The FSDO is the last resort. And by serious risk of significant life or damage, I don't mean that you report a hangnail because the guy could get distracted and fly into a mountain. That's not what I'm talking about. Like in the case of Premier One driver, reported for calling clear of runway when he was still a second or two from truly clearing. That is not significant. Calling the FSDO because Brian Turner cracked a joke about taking money under the table for instructing, when even if you didn't know Brian, would have been clearly tongue-in-cheek had you asked around, talked to Brian, or even just looked at his other posts. That is not significant. Significant would be a CFI showing off acrobatic maneuvers to students in a normal rated training aircraft. Confront the CFI. He pushes back, talk to the administrator of the school. Still no change? Call the FSDO. But you tell me in the comments, what is serious enough that you would call the FSDO on someone? Let us know. Maybe I agree. Maybe not. And that's what I have as we begin the fall of 2020. Remember, make good choices and practice genuine humility. Good choices always trump good skills. Take care.